as a brief digression and preamble, I would just like to quickly state that I wish the budget for Paul Thomas Anderson's new film, One Battle After Another, went toward the revolution instead. Now, there's this ultra-violent anime miniseries from the 90s, 1994, called Genocyber. It's a five-part, what we call an OVA, that is an anime film or series produced for home video release rather than for television or for the cinema. And it's science fiction oriented. It has a pretty strange and over-the-top plot. It was based on a manga which ran in 1992 and 93. The adapter of the manga, the director of the anime series, was distinct from the author of the manga itself. The manga was authored by one Tony Takazaki, and the anime was directed by one Kôichi Ôhata. And the experience of Genocyber is primarily defined by its high intense degree of very graphic violence. It is absolute splatter, some of it very creatively executed, we have to admit. And if I had read the scripts of Genocyber prior to seeing it in execution, I would find that there was some certainly interesting ideas in there, certainly visually, and relating to the despair which certain developments in the plot induce, I think. Although the appeal of this work is obviously the relentless, stylized, gory violence, there is an art to this kind of thing. It may seem quite horrible and sickly insensitive to get any enjoyment out of depictions of excessive violence in artistic or otherwise fictional pieces. However, I find it genuinely fascinating and just gratifying. We are okay with depictions of physical comedy and slapstick in a cartoon, or over-the-top farcical context, so long as no one sees any actual blood or puncturing of any skin. I find that the mutation of the human form into ruptured bloody messes and degraded sickly forms is an immensely fascinating avenue of human art in general. There is such a thing as perhaps going too far, when it is, say, less stylized and more just a ruthless depiction of unrelenting sadistic violence. And whilst I'm not going to get into whether I feel that said kind of works are outright unethical or not, sometimes I do and sometimes I might not, I do not find it nearly as impressive as the more stylized, aestheticized takes, almost expressionistic even, regarding depictions of graphic violence. I like tricks and illusions, and sometimes if it is a, say, dynamic, animated realization of over-the-top bloody violence, then I'm fairly interested in the results. Potentially an overly or sickeningly realistic wash of violence I am less impressed with. I know I find outright snuff films unwatchable and totally traumatizing, and if one simply reduces the ability to recognize real from fake to such a degree as to render them perhaps indistinguishable from one another, I at least am not interested, and less impressed than in the over-the-top gore, possibly slapstick endeavors of films like, say, Evil Dead 2, Brain Dead, the Stuart Gordon classics such as Reanimator, From Beyond, Dolls, or Stuck, or even those horrifyingly amoral cannibal films from Italy in the very late 70s and quite early 80s. They did depict animal murders unsimulated, which was certainly quite immoral and, as art, just simply not impressive in a clinical respect, which were the repulsively logical extensions of exploitative films made since the early 1930s, for example, such as King Vidor's 1932 feature Bird of Paradise, wherein a sailor fell in love with a beautiful young woman from a Pacific island, and the drab, mundane assembly line duties of that soldier's modern world contrasted with the primeval, alluring freedom which the woman's tribe appeared to promise and tease, certainly when that woman is portrayed by the enchantingly beautiful Dolores Del Rio. But anyway, Genocyber, to me, is a ton of fun. Yes, not for everyone, but if you like the idea of it, I suspect that you might find yourself rather loving your viewing of this 1994's Genocyber. The depiction of science fiction and visual media at this time in history was to be quite compelling for our posterity. It reminded us of a slightly more comfortable time, when these seemed like depictions of a prospective future, even if they were certainly horrifying, like that depicted in this work Genocyber. Whereas now we watch slightly better or worse versions of our generally accepted high-tech present, and even when witnessing these creepy nihilistic sci-fi pieces within the later 20th century, especially post the Cold War and pre-9/11, say, it seemed like comfortable, quite edgy pieces of amoral gratification and utter catharsis to entertain you for the end of time. Cozy and self-assured in Francis Fukuyama's supposed hopeful to him and many, many others end of history. Genocyber is a blast to watch, or so it is to me, and many others might feel mortified that someone could feel this way. But as a pure, perhaps stylistic exercise, as portrayals of clearly over-the-top graphic violence and genuinely compelling, imaginative, sci-fi doused futures, yeah, I would claim that Genocyber has numerous merits which, unless one wants to be really determined or convicted, that depictions of stylized violence in media must be made to be a major moral issue. And I would hear out their arguments if indeed they do have any to share with us, though otherwise I feel as though we can enjoy these portrayals of the twisting and misshaping of the human fleshy shells, and sate our curiosity for this area of our shared species' omnipresent mortality, all without at all reducing what it means to witness or enact such bloody violence in our real world, or to feel indifferent to it actually occurring beyond the confines of your TV screen, or beyond the confines of the paper which the initial drawings were penciled onto, we could also say. Yeah, I do dig it. Not sure what else I can add to this. Guess I'll be moving on then.